All right. Next, we are going to move to our next guest, which is a friend of mine, long time nuclear advocate by the name of Meredith Angwin. I think we have a slide for her coming up here. So Meredith actually wrote a book that's sitting on my shelf behind me here, called "Campaigning for Clean Air." And this book is kind of a user manual to making a difference in your community by advocating for nuclear power. So Meredith, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Does this scene look a little bit familiar to you of this protest, but perhaps a different energy source?
Well, I've certainly headed a lot of protests to try and keep Vermont Yankee going, and I have a little presentation about that. Can you set that up? I'm sorry, I can't manage to.
But right before we do that, can you go back a slide? I just wanted to share this photo. There it is. So that was a good day. That was back in 2016 when you can see Meredith. Meredith is there along with myself. There's sparkling wine in front of my face. You can't really see it, but and we're celebrating the zero emissions credit that was received for the upstate nuclear plants. Unfortunately, in that deal, the bargaining chip was to say, okay, fine, well, you can close down Indian Point as long as we can keep these upstate plants. And that was the compromise that was brokered. And really the only people that won out on that were Andrew Cuomo and some of his political friends. The people of New York definitely didn't win on that one. And I guess now we're seeing, it's overtime at this point, and we're seeing if we can still turn it around. You can go to the next, get into Meredith's presentation now.
I'm sorry to say that I'm having a problem with Zoom, so I can't see what's up in the main part. Do you have my slide up right now?
We got every nuclear plant is a jewel right now.
Yes, that's something I want to talk about. And in the next slide, if you is about the fact that I'm mostly known for trying to save Vermont Yankee plant, which is very much of a jewel. And unfortunately, it is closed down. So I want to talk about closing a nuclear plant, and I want to talk about it in terms of circles of pain. And I really mean circles of pain because basically I have done many presentations in which I talk about, the amount of people who are laid off, or the amount of CO2 that goes into the air, or the amount of taxes that don't get collected, and so forth. But I'm going to be I'm going to have a rather short talk here, I hope, and it will be about how much difficulty closing a nuclear plant causes for so many different groups. The first group, of course, is workers who get laid off. The second is supporters. The third is the town, an area that the plant was in, then the environment, and then the grid. So if you could move to the next one. So let's talk about workers and supporters. There's a lot of things like, okay, Vermont Yankee had a, $600,000 annual payroll or something like this. People lost their jobs. Yes, that's true. But the main thing that really happened, some people lost their jobs and couldn't get another job. Not many. In most cases, it was a matter of people had to move. And it wasn't always an easy thing to move, because if you had a son who was going to be a senior in high school next year, maybe you got a job in Mississippi, but the family didn't want to move to Mississippi. So you had people being separated. Then, of course, in the old days, then they'd have a refueling outage. And at the refueling outage, all kinds of people would come to town, and they would go to the local businesses, and they'd rent rooms from people who they always rented rooms from, and all that went away too. I mean, people have no idea the number of things that that go away when people are, quote, just losing their jobs. It is so much stuff. Families were separated and stressed. And the town itself lost a lot of volunteers. There's often a very strong volunteer ethic at a nuclear plant. And there are people from the nuclear plant and spouses of people from the nuclear plant in the volunteer fire departments and the paramedics and the schools, and then all of a sudden they weren't there. And similarly, the nuclear plant have a very often have very high value of education. They take a lot of training. They talk about training at home. They give a value of education to their kids. The schools became different. Not that there weren't very smart kids in the schools that didn't have anything to do with the nuclear plant, but the mix changed. It was a different place afterwards. So if you can show the next slide, I'd like to say that instead of talking about the revenues per se and how much the schools had to cut back and all this, I'm just going to say that in New England, we have town meetings to decide how town money is spent. That's how we do it. And Vernon, which sponsored Vermont Yankee, which was a town in which Vermont Yankee was located, had a town meeting every year. The year that Vermont Yankee was going to shut down, the cuts were so huge and so difficult to understand where to ascribe them that the Vernon kept having to close the town meeting and start it again because it was just going too long. It was impossible. So here you have a newspaper from around that time which says, Vernon to meet again for town meeting part 3. This is what I'm trying to say about pain as opposed to dollars. I could tell you, oh yeah, they had to sell their police cruisers and they had to cut back a lot of the school and they cut back this much for the school. I think this sort of says it all. It was very, very difficult to even plan for it. So let's look at the environment for a moment. Nuclear was replaced by natural gas. Oh, I remember when nuclear was when Vernon was they were going to close down Vermont Yankee, and everybody was explaining how it was going to be just they're going to be renewables. Why are you guys worried? Well, as a matter of fact, no, it was all natural gas. The grid, the New England grid was in the final year of Vermont Yankee was 34% nuclear, 43% natural gas. The year after Vermont Yankee, it was 29% nuclear and 49% natural gas. It basically went down 5% nuclear, up 6% natural gas. And there's some round off in there, so I really can't say, why it's 5 and 6 because I didn't, put all the 0.4 and 0.6. But yeah, it was replaced by natural gas. So that is my environmental statement about it. But I want to go on to the next slide, and this isn't actually as much about, this is about environment too, but it leads to the next slide. This is 2015 ISO New England's description of what portion of the energy in New England came from various sources. You see that 50% there over there, that big blue thing? That is natural gas the year after Vermont Yankee closed. The red thing is nuclear. It had been bigger in an earlier version. If we go back to the slide before, you can see that nuclear goes up to 49%, which is what that big blue thing is. And before that, it was natural gas went up to 49%, which was what the big blue thing is. And before that, natural gas was bigger than nuclear. It was 43 to 34, but it wasn't overwhelmingly like that. So you see, you have this huge amount of natural gas being burned, which is not what you would want for the environment. And so here we have our final slide. And so, well, I mean, they're burning more natural gas. That's bad. Yes, it's also bad, but what really happens is that the grid becomes more fragile. With a 50% natural gas grid in a coal care area, the houses in the cold snap are competing for that natural gas, and they win because that's how it's set up. You turn off the natural gas to a power plant before you turn off gas to houses. That is the way the rules are set up. That is the way everything is set up. And so what you have, therefore, is that you have power plants can be dual fuel burners. That is, they can store natural oil, at their site. You can't store natural gas at the site very readily. You have to it's a just-in-time delivery through a pipeline. And if you can't get natural gas, then you begin storing oil at the site. Now, ISO New England knew that there were problems in a cold snap, and they paid plants to store oil at the site. Now, you understand that some of us, we knew that they needed to do this, but the idea that there was 34 million going to buy oil when, we couldn't possibly allow a nuclear plant to have a subsidy. Oh my, that would kill everybody. So here's during one of the cold snaps, the black line shows how much oil would be stored if this typical natural gas plant stored all the oil it could. It didn't. The red line shows the amount of oil it had the first day of the cold snap. And then you notice that the oil keeps going down. I mean, because it gets hard to resupply during a cold snap. The governors already had said that oil delivery trucks were allowed to run for longer hours, and even if the drivers were tired, because things were really getting out of hand. And so the resupplying was very difficult. And so at the end of the cold snap, you notice that the power plant had 1 day's oil available. A friend of mine said to me, well, what happened if the cold snap lasted 2 more days? And my answer is, well, aren't we lucky it didn't? So what I'm saying is the grid becomes more fragile this way. And I just really don't like all the things that happen when a nuclear plant shuts down. So here's my final slide. A nuclear plant is a jewel. Keep it running. It has jobs. It has a stable, educated workforce. The workforce at every nuclear plant I've ever been to has a strong volunteer ethic. It pays significant taxes to the town, so the town can have a town meeting of 1 day instead of 3 days. or if you want to look at it a different way, so the town can keep up its educational programs. It clean air, not a combustion process. That's why I called my book Campaigning for Clean Air. I have patents in NOx abatement, and NOx abatement is hard, and NOx is bad. And so clean air is very important to me. And it keeps fuel on site. It has a stable grid in bad weather, so that it allows the grid to be stable in bad weather. You don't have just-in-time gas. You don't have only as much oil as we stored at the beginning. It's very important for grid stability. So my conclusion is keep Indian Point operating for all these reasons, because shutting a nuclear plant down is really a bad thing. And that's it, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Meredith. All right, fantastic. Wow. I'm muted. There we go. Thank you so much, Meredith. I appreciate that. And thank you for your work on nitrous oxide abatement as well. It's one of the things we don't, it seems like we get stuck talking about climate change quite a bit without thinking about the human health impacts of particulates and various noxious fumes coming off these power plants. So a really good reminder. I was just thinking, you're talking about storage of oil and storage of gas and how difficult that really is to have over a long period of time. And I was thinking, what better storage technology is there than uranium itself?
Yes,
you can have 18 months of fuel just sitting on site, no problem. I guess that's what you get when your fuel source comes from two neutron stars locked in binary formation, eventually colliding to form your element. That's a lot of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Well,
much for sharing that. I'm tempted to throw a few more questions your way, but in the interest of time, I'm